Aloha, everyone. My name is Anderson Lay. I'm the artistic director for the 40th Annual Hawaii International Film Festival presented by Halekulani. And it's my great honor to moderate this a conversation with Dave Filoni. He's one of our recipients of the Halekulani Maverick Award. Before I introduce Dave, I'd like to just give his quick background regarding and why we chose him to be one of our Maverick Award recipients. So, Dave Filoni is an American animation television director, writer, and producer who started his career on such shows as King of the Hill and Avatar: The Last Airbender. He realized a lifelong dream in 2005 when he was selected by George Lucas to help build Lucasfilm's animation studio from the ground up and create the company's first series, Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Over a span of 7 seasons, the Emmy Award-winning and fan-favorite series pushed the boundaries of television animation, receiving acclaim not only for its technical achievements, but its complex and compelling storylines. Filoni's follow-up series, the Emmy-nominated Star Wars Rebels, similarly received universal praise for building upon the Star Wars saga. Filoni recently finished production on the 2nd season of the Emmy Award-winning Disney Plus series, The Mandalorian, serving as executive producer, episodic director, and writer. Millions of fans consider Filoni the rightful heir to the Star Wars universe as storyteller, historian, and direct line to George Lucas's original vision. Hence, the Hawaii National Film Festival is honored to bestow this Halekulani Maverick Award to Dave Filoni. But what is the Maverick Award, you may ask? It's given to an international cinema artist who has a unique and eclectic career trajectory, contributing to international cinema arts in an innovative way. This Maverick does things on their own terms, creating work that can have a rabid following that ranges from cult status to mainstream popularity. Hence, HIFF40 is honored to bestow this award to Dave Filoni. So, thank you. Allow me to welcome and give a warm aloha to Mr. Dave Filoni. Hi, Dave. How's it going?
I'm great. Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. Crazy. Really appreciate
it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, I know you're a very, very busy man. At the time of this recording, it's basically less than a week away from the season 2 premiere of The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. So I know you're very busy. And thank you again for taking the time to talk with us. Absolutely. So, Dave, let's talk about where'd you grow up? Let's start from there.
I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, my hometown. I love my hometown, just very big into the Penguins and played ice hockey and, all those things growing up, big sports town. My family's from up in Monongahela River. I'm a 3rd-generation Pittsburgher. So that was where my adventure began, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so, as obviously, one of the kind of like things that really endear yourself to the Star Wars fandom is basically that you are a fan yourself. So you talk about growing up, what kind of aside from your love for Star Wars, but what are other kind of properties or franchises, comic books, TV, movies that you love?
Yeah, it's interesting. As far as the fan community is such a massive thing nowadays. Yeah. But when I was a kid, it was just called being a kid. Like, I didn't know I was a fan of Star Wars. Star Wars was just the thing. And so fortunate to grow up in a time when I think movies were just exploding in the kind of genre and action adventure with Star Wars and Raiders and Close Encounters. And there was just, things that had never been visually attempted before on screen at the scale and scope they were just flying into my brain every summer. But Star Wars was like far and away, like, you knew there was nothing else was going to be like Star Wars, visual effects wise. I think story wise, musically, a big thing that gravitated me towards Star Wars was probably the music. I grew up in a house, both my mother and father were musicians or musically inclined. My father was on the Pittsburgh Opera Board, and was an architect. And one of his specialties was acoustical engineering of theater spaces. So the Benedum Center in Pittsburgh or Heinz Hall in Pittsburgh, we were always there, seeing symphonies or operas, and he staged operas actually. It was one of the things that he liked to do. So music was always playing in the house, and he would play the John Williams soundtrack because when I was a kid, we didn't have a lot of access to film. It was like the first Godzilla movies that I bought were out of Publishers Clearinghouse, little Betamax tapes that came in the mail. And
Right.
so for me, it was, listening to the music, and we had the films on records. And I think
Yeah.
that's why we all relate so powerfully to the music. The music's wonderful, but my father would show me how it related to Strauss, or how it related to Wagner, how it related to Copland, and he would, break down different things. So music as a storytelling tool was something that I was kind of ingrained with growing up over the years, and different styles of music. And I was always encouraged. I think that's a big thing. I was always encouraged by my parents to kind of branch out. And because we did, I always tell people it's funny, but we had a Betamax player. So my father was convinced of its quality being so superior to VHS. And so he had bought, Close Encounters on Beta, but we had the Seven Samurai, we had the Seventh Seal, we had Battleship Potemkin, we had all of these movies, Wild Strawberries. We had a whole bunch of films that were foreign films, independent films that he would have me watch when I was very young. And I think it left a big impression on me, because over the years when I would watch Seven Samurai, I would find that I took something different home from it every time I watched it. As a young kid, it was probably a little more difficult, but I liked the action in it.
Right.
But as I got older, I started to realize, like, wow, the humor in this is amazingly contemporary, and yet it works so perfectly. And then you start to realize how many things are influenced by Kurosawa. And then when you understand George Lucas worked with him and knew him, you go, oh, it's like eureka. This is maybe why these images make sense, and it's flowing because I'm paying attention to another artist who was influenced by that artist.
Yeah.
So I had all those influences, but for me, on a basic level as a kid, Robotech, the Macross saga, huge for me as a kid growing up, just
Really?
massive. Watching a Godzilla movies is one thing that I maybe know more than Star Wars. It might be Godzilla. I love Godzilla. Always have. Tokusatsu film genre is a massive thing for me. So, those, the Ultraman saga series, all of it, just the pure creativity of it was something that kept me inspired. So those would probably be some big things that influence. And then for animation, it was really Fantasia. I would say Fantasia as a film, because of its captivating use of images and music, and how there was, no real dialogue to speak of, but it was portraying, it showed me animation in a completely different way, in a different light. And I thought, well, since I could draw, maybe that was my avenue of exploration, because I'm not a traditional animator by any sense, with how people, I think, learn to do it. So I just like the expressionism of Fantasia, and some of the sequences in it. So I don't know, it just boiled into an interest in film at the end of the day. And up the street, one of my neighbors, Dave Malnerick, he had like a Super 8 camera, and he'd rent films that you'd see, like a reel of Empire Strikes Back. You'd watch it flickering by, and that was it was such a magic time of film for me. It was so analog, I guess is the term now, right? So
absolutely. I mean, my parents, my dad invested in the Betamax as well, so we had a pretty big Betamax collection. And then, like, especially that's funny. That's great that you also had that as well. But so I mean, with Fantasia, like, it's like, maybe that's a perfect segue into kind of your interest in animation and how you got into the field. I mean, into that field. So was this like, I guess I assume that you watched Fantasia when you were very young, and then how did that kind of love for for this film, but also kind of like parlay into something that you wanted to kind of pursue as a career? Was this like in high school, or were you making your own animated films or what have you? So.
It was hard. I think it's hard for kids now to relate, because they have such wonderful tools at their disposal. And, I always encourage, young kids now, I'm like, just make something. That's the only way you're going to learn. Just start making. You have so many tools to do it. I had a video camera that would take 1 frame a second, so I would have to play it in fast forward to make it move the way I wanted it to move. I didn't understand. I didn't have a lot of avenues, or I was kind of not the most outgoing in a lot of ways to say how do I get a film camera, those things. I drew a lot. I was drawing and drawing and drawing all the time, and that was like the main skill, drawing and painting. And it just kind of, as you're trying to see your future and what would you like to do, I just started to think, well, maybe animation, because it seemed like more of an industry, right? Like that there was I work for a studio. I'd like to work for a studio, a bunch of artists. In high school, we had an art teacher that took us to meet an independent artist who was making sculptures and paintings. And, it's amazing work on the north side of Pittsburgh. And I asked him, I said, well, what do you do when you're not selling paintings? And he goes, oh, I pump gas. And I was like, that's such a reality check for me as a young person. Like, oh, I see. So this might not be enough. And then you have a practical, like you have this job to do. But I think that was really important, because I think, you want to believe that you're going to do great things when you're young, but you need to also be aware of reality of the world and life experiences, and how maybe it doesn't work out like you think. I mean, I always calculated, because I also play ice hockey, and I'm like, well, there's only 2 goalies on each team in the NHL. That's not a lot of goalies, and there's a lot of kids that want to be that goalie. Right. So like, what are my chances of being the starter or the backup? I would think like there are only so many, lead animators at the Walt Disney Company. In the whole world, there's only that couple, group of people. What are the chances I'm going to make it to be one of those people? And so I would think about that. But I loved, like I said, watching a movie like Akira just really blew my mind, that the artistry in that, the drawing was so beyond anything that I thought of as animation, as I had seen mostly growing up in the States, and, seeing Macross. And then when some characters in that show died, I was blown away by what happened to Roy Fokker. It was shocking, but I was like, this is it. This is like Star Wars. This is real drama, and it's all hand drawn, and I could do that, because live action seems so nebulous to me. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for that, and that level of interaction with people. I don't know, but this I could draw. It's like you're in a comfort zone. So that was kind of the big thing that kept me wanting to get into animation, because I always loved Star Wars. But I thought for me Star Wars would be building models, building practical models. I had the big ILM book from back in the day that if you liked special effects, you had to own the Art of Industrial Light and Magic book. And it's crazy now, because I know a lot of the people that are in that book, which that always blows my mind. And I always tease them about it, because I was like, I was 10 and you're still here, which is something I love about Lucasfilm, by the way. But I just was really interested in trying to make those types of stories. But it's one thing to want to do that in animation. It is a very difficult thing to find, at least back when I was growing up in the early 90s, going to college, for anyone to be doing action adventure. I mean, I think the Batman series was also kind of a big revelation to people, that you could do these superhero stories and tell them in a way that many people accepted. Kids, adults could enjoy them. So animation with Bruce Timm stuff was really breaking into that. And there was a lot of things happening, but to me, nothing like what I was seeing out of Japan and the type of animation that they had been doing. And it was a long time before I ever got to actually do that or something like it.
Yeah, I mean, like Robotech, with the Macross Saga and Southern Cross and Mospeada, like how they kind of like adapted it into.
Oh, it's amazing!
It's amazing, and it's built this universe, and this is after school television.
Yeah. Yes,
it was crazy.
But it was fantastic. Voltron the design of Voltron was fantastic. And I loved the story moments in it. It was kind of like kaiju he was fighting, right? And,
right, exactly.
And Transor Z, which is great Mazinger. All but I love the design and the aesthetic and of all of those shows, and what the artists were, maybe it's because I watched so many Godzilla movies growing up. It was just in me. I really loved it. But it's hard a lot of shows, aren't like that over here. I mean, I might have loved those things, but the first thing that I really worked on as a job was King of the Hill, which is
Right.
very far from Macross, but a wonderful show in its own right.
Absolutely.
Wonderfully written. And I learned so much in like the first year I worked on that show from so many talented people,
Hmm.
but it never really, it's like that thing you chase when you're in this industry is how do you work on something that's like, that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I'd go watch a film and I'd be like, gosh, if I could just make one thing in my career that's as good as that, then
Right.
I'd be so satisfied. And so that's a little what I've chased, I think. How
Yeah.
do you get to that thing where you can tell a story that you really feel, and then you think the audience will feel that as well,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And then also like with King of the Hill, like it was actually only really the only second major network animated series after The Simpsons, and this is like kind
Yeah.
of the early days of Adult Swim and all that stuff.
Yes.
So it
Yeah.
was kind of like kind of in a way virgin territory when it came to kind of like you're shooting animation as a serious medium, right? And like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
and it was like a sitcom, and it was really well done. And I think maybe for the time, because we were in animation, we could have a broader scope than maybe a three-camera sitcom was doing. We
Right.
didn't have to just be in the main living room and the kitchen. We had those scenes, but I remember one of the first episodes that I became an assistant director on. I was Hank Hill went to the Dallas Cowboys training camp. And since now I was going to get to do the storyboard, I thought, well, I'm gonna try to make this wider. I want the shots to be wider. And so I tried to do my version of shooting when he walks out onto this field the first time, like it's the natural,
Right.
because that was such a great fusion of
Right. Right.
high, like what feels like mythology and
Absolutely.
Arthurian story to me, and baseball. Like
Yeah.
I didn't know when I grew up a single kid in Little League that didn't draw that lightning bolt on their hat
Absolutely.
after they saw that movie, right? And
Yeah.
it hits you. Um, it's just so well done. And so I was doing all these kind of like dramatic upshots and things. If you watch King of the Hill, it's very different for King of the Hill to do those things.
Right.
It feels separate, but people seem to really like it, and it fit his like the psychology of Hank putting himself in the place of the Dallas Cowboy legends to him. It's
Hmm.
hard as a Steelers fan to try to make the Cowboys feel great, but I did it because it was my job. But
Right.
it that was where, and you start to learn like, oh, there's a psychology behind this that can be deeper, and the images are conveying that psychology. And I think you spend a lot of time trying to master how do you get that across. How do you again, it's like you're communicating with the audience, you're communicating with your crew, your
Hmm.
team. Film is such a tremendous, be it animation, live action, collaborative art that
Right.
everybody's got to be on the same page telling the story and bringing their best to it. And how do you explain that so that it kinetically happens in the moment it should? And that's the fun thing to chase, and it's the terrifying thing because you think you might miss it, but when you get
Right.
it, it's good.
And then you worked on for how many seasons did you work on for the King of the Hill?
I worked, I think, on 2 seasons of King of the Hill, and then I went and began work on like some other series. I had met a lot of people, and I worked on a show called Mission Hill that a director that I'd met, Lauren McMullen, was supervising, and I got to be her assistant director to supervising director, and she was very, very talented, and I learned a lot working with her, and it was a different style. And I have a lot of I don't know. I like to think I'm a pretty loyal person, and working for Film Roman, they had given me this great opportunity to work on these shows, and I was very invested in trying to get another show work going at the studio. Because the more series you have, the more work you have for people, the
Right.
more of this talent we can keep. And yeah, I am a firm believer that when you're in a studio system like this, the talent at the studio is the studio. And you
Hmm.
don't want people going out the door. You want them to be there. You want them to be invested. And so I worked on that show. And then The Oblongs was another show I worked on. It was a bizarre, I think a WB show. And
Okay.
then I went from there to Disney, because you meet more and more people and talent, and you think, oh, I'm going to try this maybe and see what's happening over there. And we tried a couple series, and I just couldn't get anything going there. So I thought maybe it's a time for change. But I was at Film Roman for about 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
before I moved on, I think, at the end of the
But
day.
they did both live action and animation, right? They did or was it?
Film Roman was mainly
Yeah,
it was mainly cartoon,
the
mainly
cartoons.
animation.
Okay.
Yeah, they did The
Got it.
Simpsons. That was like the big
Of
flagship
course.
thing.
Duh, duh. Yeah, yeah, of course.
And before I
Uh,
got there, they had a bunch of series, Bobby's Worlds and stuff like that.
right, 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 right. So let's talk about like another property that you worked on, which for generation like for I would say millennials and Gen Z, this is their Star Wars. It's like Avatar: The Last Airbender. Can you talk about kind of your journey to working on that show?
Yeah, that that was a really special thing. I knew Mike DiMartino and Brian Kanitzko from working at Film Rome, and we'd all worked together on the series Mission Hill, and we were all friends. And it's funny because of my love of Japanese animation.
Mhm.
And back then, I don't know if you relate to this, but we were digging up these videotapes around town of a director named Miyazaki.
Of course,
And
yeah.
this guy was just crushing it. Like everything he did was
Yeah,
amazing, and yet it was very difficult to get a hold of it.
yeah,
And I had like a beat up VHS copy from some convention I'd gone to of Castle in the Sky,
right, right.
and I lent it to Brian Kanitzka. I said, "You need to watch this. You
Mm,
got to see what they're doing over there because it's incredible. Like the storytelling was just so inspiring. The art was so inspiring, and Totoro I think was the most well known at the time,
sure.
right? But it was just something else, something that felt so good when you watched it and so right. And my favorite's Mononoke. I mean, that's well
Mm,
chronicled how much I like wolves. And I should mention
right,
too, Carol Ballard films are a big influence on me. Never Cry Wolf growing up. Black Stallion,
right.
those films left an indelible impression on me. And I've actually only realized that by going back and watching them again as an adult and realizing that they probably made as big an impact on me as Star Wars did.
Mm,
And it wasn't evident at the time because it didn't come with all of the pop culture
right.
trappings of toys and things.
Yeah.
But I know the images in those films. But anyway, I had been working at Disney and I'd been a storyboard artist for a while, and I wanted to get into directing. I thought I was maybe ready for that. And I have a pattern of like I like to get in someplace and learn a lot and then think I'm ready for the challenge of directing or something like that. But I don't want to do it before I think I know enough of the skill sets and knowledge to be responsible with the team.
Hmm.
And I was actually interviewing to maybe go over and work on Family Guy,
Mm,
which is a different aesthetic for me. But I knew a lot of those people because King of the Hill, Simpsons, Family Guy, a lot of the same people.
yeah.
But Mike and Brian had just fortuitously broken off and pitched this show Airbender, and they asked me to come over and watch it. And I saw the pilot and I was like, wow, you guys did it. I was like, this is that thing that when I was in a kid, look back in Pittsburgh, looking at the sky, having watched Robotech that afternoon, going, I would love to make something like that. This is it. Like, and it's so rare that you get to that moment. But and you always wonder, will you recognize it? Boy, I sure recognized it. And
Right.
they're like, well, we need a director for it. I'm like, I'll do it. Like, I didn't let them finish. I'd have done it for free. I was just so excited by it. And,
Right.
they said, well, we need a director for the first part, and the opener is a two-parter. I said, I'll just do both. Let me do both parts. You want it to be like one movie? Let me direct both parts of it. And so working on Airbender with that group was the realization of a dream to make something that could show respect to the love I had for Japanese animation and what it was like growing up. And we learned so much from the overseas studio that was
Mm,
making the animation and the artists there.
right.
There was a massive collaboration between us, and that's something that Mike and Brian had gone over to Korea to live with the animators while they made the pilot,
Hmm.
and so they had a great relationship with them. And we all seemed very set on this idea of the overseas studio a lot was treated as a work for hire group that
Right.
would be farmed out animation, and they follow the exposure sheet that we send them and all this stuff. But I'm like, as an artist, how that doesn't sound satisfying to me. And we all wanted the overseas studio to be invested in the work that they were doing,
Yeah.
to own it, and the characterizations and the art of it. And so that was something that I think was unique to Airbender, was the amount of communication and collaboration with the overseas studios, especially because I felt like the style we were drawing was something that those artists had grown up with way more than I did.
Right.
So
Right.
we were learning from them. And I think you can see it in the work where our abilities, at Nickelodeon LA got better as we were seeing what they were sending back in the layouts and in the animation itself. And so again, the collaboration and the cycle of knowledge and cycle of information got better and better. And there was a lot of Star Wars reference to me in Airbender all the time, and I would give Mike and Brian a lot of flack about that, because that was when the prequels were coming out, and
Sure. Yeah.
I would be preaching about the prequels, which is how I wound up at Lucasfilm, oddly.
Right.
But I'll tell you another thing, and it's funny. I don't know if you can edit this down, but I have in my office here. The first week I went to work on Airbender, because Appa, the flying bison, he had these 6 legs, and he was like the cat bus, and I'm like, that's gonna be a weird thing to draw. So I sculpted one out of Super Sculpey the
Wow.
first weekend, and I built it. I still have it. It's still in
Wow.
the office here.
Wow.
I'd show you if I went and got it, if you want me to get it. But
Yeah. Yeah. Good
here,
graphic.
let me hang on. We'll
Yeah,
cut it
yeah,
down.
yeah, sure.
This will be a fun show and tell. But I'm very hands-on in the art I do. But so I had built this Appa from
Wow.
Airbender, and this was the first weekend I worked on the show. I was so excited I went home, and this was basically for me to be a drawing aid. So, if I was at my desk drawing up, I could take him off and kind of angle him to camera, and I put a little on top of him there, and I did the hair and stuff. But yeah, but it was just a way to the legs and get some perspective and look at his feet. And when I was drawing it, I would hold it. And so, yeah, I've had this thing for years and years. And, but yeah, these skills, I mean, that's the thing. You never know when you're making something like we do, be it animation, live action, so many skills can come in handy. And sculpting, I've definitely found over the years, is one of them, that is handy, because you're thinking in dimensions, you're thinking in depth.
Right.
You're not just thinking on one plane. So yeah, it was fun. And then I've had it all these years. It's a fun thing for me.
So I mean, is that part of your creative process, that you usually kind of sculpt these characters, like these characters and creatures and whatnot?
When I used to have time, yeah. I will say for Mandalorian though, one of the production designer, Andrew Jones, and I, we were trying to design this one stage for the volume, and I guess we'll talk more about that in a bit. But I wanted it to be a certain way, and when we designed it, and it wasn't quite right. And so he said, well, I'll get some clay and we'll come in early. So we got in early to our little production house, and he and I just, like 2 kids in kindergarten, had sticks and clay, and we built this little, creek bed, and it became the blueprint. And I sculpted this thing. I want it just to bend like this, and there should be water here. And we had something tangible. And, growing up, my father was an architect. They'd build architectural models all the time.
Right.
And when he'd stage operas, he'd build small scale. And so this was just a very, very familiar way. And again, so we could all stand around and say, here's the line. I want the camera here. And they're going to walk down this path. And, so it's just fun. And then you have this great memory. And then when you're standing on the set of this thing that you made out of clay, you're like, this is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like kind of watching those behind the scenes making of documentaries of Return of the Jedi, and they use like those Kenner toys to map out.
Oh yeah, Dennis Mirren did that.
Yeah.
That was previs back in the day. That was the pre-visualization. Yeah, we've talked about that. It's cool.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, talk about like just purely playing with a train set, right? Like
oh yeah.
So let's talk about that. Kind of that fateful meeting with George Lucas, and then you entering in, basically into Lucasfilm. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, that was, yeah, I don't know. It makes me think I'm just living in a matrix, like how could these things have happened? But
Right.
on Airbender, myself and some of the other directors, we'd been talking a lot about Star Wars, and everybody knows I love Star Wars. And every job I've been at, I would draw like the characters from King of the Hill dressed up like Star Wars characters. I've drawn the Airbender characters dressed up like Star Wars. And I talk a lot about Star Wars because I like it.
Mhm.
And so they give me a hard time because it's the last one, Revenge of the Sith, is coming out.
Right.
And my friend Chris Pernosky was running Titmouse Animation Studio, was doing the opening title sequence for Airbender. And when he was in there, he was like, I don't know, I want to be excited about it, but I haven't really enjoyed the first two. And I said, well, you're watching them the wrong way. You have a bias. You need to let go of that, and you need to watch Phantom Menace again, and you need to think about these things when you're watching it. And so I just gave him a little bit of like a little lesson in the Force, I thought, and sent him off. And he would come back and be like, wow, I enjoyed that so much better after you talked to me about it. To do Attack of the Clones. And so we would just talk about it. And in the midst of that and all this excitement, because, Revenge of the Sith is coming out, it's the last big Star Wars film, I get a call from Lucasfilm. Now, when you work at Nickelodeon Animation and you get a call from a place like Lucasfilm and you're a big fan of Star Wars, the first thing that you remember is that they make SpongeBob right across the hall from you. And those guys are great practical jokers. And in animation itself is a lot of practical jokers. And I'm thinking like, what are the chances that this is actually Lucasfilm? I'm like, this is just somebody that wants to get me excited about this so I look like an idiot, because why in the world would they call me? And so I talked to the woman on the phone, and I was polite, but I was also a little bit standoffish because I didn't want them to think they were getting the better of me.
Right.
And luckily, before she hung up, I actually said, look, I got to ask you a question. And this is Catherine Winder, the producer of Clone Wars. Because she said, I'm calling for Lucasfilm Animation. I'm like, but you don't have an animation division. She's like, well, it's new, and we just started it. I'm like, uh-huh. And she's like, we're making a Clone Wars TV series. I'm like, well, you already did that. Gennady Tartakovsky did Clone Wars. This is fantastic.
Right.
She's like, yeah, but this is going to be computer animated. I'm like, well, I don't do computer animation. And she's like, I know, but I got your name from George. And I'm like, really? I'm like, okay. And she's like, well, I'd like to meet with you. I'm like, okay. But I was like, this is all a bunch of, and I later found out she didn't mean George Lucas. She meant this writer, George Christic, who at the time I didn't know.
Oh.
But he was good friends with Chris Pernosky. So Chris Pernosky, if you can follow my circuitous thread, gave my name to George Christic, who gave my name to Catherine Winder. But I told Catherine, I said, when you mention George and you're from Lucasfilm, people think it only means one George. Right. There's only one George at Lucasfilm. So luckily, she didn't cancel the meeting with me. She, I asked her, I said, who is this really? This is not Lucasfilm. This is not real. And she said it was, and luckily she'd already made an appointment with me, so she didn't want to cancel it. But I met her, and I was much more of a sane human being that day, and explained, that what I did, and I like Star Wars and animation. I had never done computer animation, but to get the job, I had to meet George, and meeting him. It's just one of those things where I'd convince myself, like, well, I'll meet him. He's worked with some of the best people in the industry. He will be polite, I'm sure, because he seems like a nice guy, but then he'll send me on my way because he's looking for somebody better. And so I met him just purely out of like this, what a great opportunity to meet, a legend in my field in filmmaking and hear what he has to say about Star Wars. And as I met him in the main house on the Skywalker Ranch, and he's talking. All the things he was saying about Jedi were things that I believed because of his movies, and not just like in a surface way. I was like, oh yeah, I get that. Like they're kind of like negotiating samurai in a film. They put their katana on the table, and they're like, if we can't come to an accord, this is going to be a problem. I'm like, oh, I get that. And so I was like feeling very validated because it's like, oh yeah, all these things I'm right and my friends are wrong. This is going to be great. And so, I only met him for like 10 minutes, I'd say. He looked through my portfolio really quickly. And then the producer said, well, that's our time is up. And, before I left, just the way I was raised, I said, I'm never going to see this guy again.
Mhm.
So I said, well, it's nice to meet you. And I shook his hand. He said, it's very nice to meet you. And then I left. And I thought, wow, that's over with. That's
Right.
great. He was
Right.
nice. He was what I'd hope he was. Just a straightforward guy. Wow, what an experience. I can talk about this in line. That's awesome. I have like bragging rights, which is very important when you're standing in line for movies.
Sure.
And they popped their heads in the door and said, he liked you. You got the job. Right then.
Right then and there. Right. Wow.
And I was like, okay, I'm not ready for that life change. And boy, life certainly changed. But yeah, that was it. Now it's been 15 years.
That's incredible. And was this like, and then Revenge of the Sith came out in 2005, right? Was this
Yeah, this was right. Yeah, so I saw the movie in the Stag Theater on the ranch about, I'd say, 4 weeks before it came out. He had us watch it, and then so we could talk about it and plan the Clone Wars series.
Wow. So, I mean, this was like really a grand experiment. I mean, aside from like, I mean, just from, I mean, aside from the other Clone Wars series, but like there's also, I mean, the only animation I know, so of course the Boba Fett sequence from the holiday
special, yeah.
And then, like
droids and
Ewoks. It was on Saturday morning cartoons, right? But this was kind of our first foray majorly into the Star Wars universe, and it had to be tied into the prequel trilogy timeline. That's very ambitious. I mean, this was like kind of like. So I mean, like it was the plan to always have it be, I guess, the pilot be released theatrically and then kick off.
No, we were making a TV series, and so Henry Gilroy and I, Henry was the writer. We approached it as such, and it was the first series that I had ever been put in charge of. I had been an episodic director on Airbender, and I did about, I think, like 5 or 6 episodes, but that was it for directing. But I felt I knew Star Wars and I was interested in this technology, and I figured I'd be surrounded by the best of the best at Lucasfilm. And so away we went. I think what none of us were prepared for was just that, well, we thought we were going to make a TV series, and we're trying to figure out what that meant and how do you not spend too much money and keep the asset numbers down and keep things at a scale that you could handle. George just does what he does, and he paints with a very big brush, and he was going to make this Star Wars. And so, I didn't realize how involved he was even going to be, because in the previous stuff, he really wasn't involved much at all on any of those animated series.
Right.
This was something where I thought maybe I'd see him once a month I would see him sometimes multiple times a week.
Right.
And it was clear that, these were going to be stories about Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. We didn't know that. I didn't even want to mess with those characters because they're his characters. But he obviously had all kinds of stories that he thought we could tell. And he was right. There were all kinds of stories left on these war stories, or he would start picking movies, One of the ways I learned to like pitch an idea, I would say, well, let's do Notorious. And then suddenly we know the movie, we know the story.
Yeah.
So he'd do a monster movie. He'd want to do a zombie movie. He'd want to do a, noir. And so it was interesting, and it was rapid, and there was no concession from him about, let's keep this small scale. It's, I want to see how big we can make this. And it was very difficult in the beginning because we came from nothing. There were no assets, there were no characters. We had to come up with a style, and it shows. I mean, the early work, I think in context for the time, it makes sense on TV, but when you can't compare it to anything like Pixar was doing, where they were releasing Incredibles. But it's all within context. But George was so thrilled with, the first stuff we were doing that he thought, why not put it out as a movie to kind of boost the awareness of it with people? And, that's the thing. He's a very supportive person. He's a very, I find, collaborative person. Mm-hmm. And he always, if we were willing to do the time and the work and do our best, he was always supportive of that. He writes the Jedi way, and I find that he follows it, very well. So, yeah, it wasn't supposed to be a movie, but then it became a movie, and we were already, by the time that movie was coming out, making episodes that we felt were superior. Sure. So I think the saving grace was that we had a series that could showcase our talents after that. And we
Sure.
had just a rule of let's just get better.
Yeah.
We never hit
Yeah.
a point where we said, okay, the style's locked and that's good enough. We were always looking to improve the show any way we could, season to season, because that's, I think, as an artist you got to evolve. So
Right. I mean, just like how the original movies were kind of an inspiration from kind of the Flash Gordon serials, right?
mhm.
And stuff like that. Was this like, I mean, was it all George when it came to the Clone Wars being? I love the prologues of being kind of like these like World War II newsreels in a way, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
He wanted a difference between the films and the series. He didn't want to do, big paragraphs. He said, let's
Right.
just get into it, keep it moving. All of
Yeah.
the classics, when in doubt, cut it out, all of the editing tricks. And,
Hmm.
but you would see, I would see working with him. Friday he'd come in at 8 and we'd work sometimes till, midnight, just editing
Yeah.
and
Right.
just experimenting and having fun. And, when he would show me how to, edit, extensively in the Avid, and, I'd be listening to him coming up with dialogue for Anakin. And I'm
Mhm.
like, wow, this is the guy. I mean, there are moments where you're like, this is the guy that came up with all of this. Like, and he would have this little binder that had notes in it that were back to college from 1975,
Wow.
names of planets and things and all the stuff that, he had a massive galaxy in his head, and Clone Wars was definitely helping getting a lot of it out.
Yeah. So how did I mean? I think in a way this is kind of like a precursor to the Mandalorian in the sense that, I mean, you can only do so much in like a 2 hour plus time frame for a movie, right? And there's so much stuff you can explore. It's like expansive universe and what have you. And having it explored in the series and all, from the conspiracies to the intrigue to all these vast amount of characters that that expand the universe. It's like really kind of like in a way I think it can be argued that you were trying to find your feet with the Clone Wars. This is a new experiment, and once you hit your stride, it became universally beloved and then and embraced by the fans, and then like even more so when you expanded it to Star Wars Rebels and Resistance and stuff like that. So can you just talk about kind of like just kind of in a way and then maybe I got my timeline wrong, but it was just kind of the start of Star Wars celebration in that sense, like because there was really kind of like aside from there was no real aside from the original trilogy and also the prequels, it was only the Clone Wars basically and Rebels when it came to kind of what was so
well, celebrations began with the prequels
yeah.
and around the time of Phantom Menace, and they had become this kind of like, here comes the movie, here comes the celebration, and
Right.
it's a big deal for Star Wars fans, and they're wonderful events because everybody there loves the same thing, and there's this great energy around that. You go to Comic-Con, which I also love, but you're there for almost like competing interests. There's Marvel, there's DC, there's
Right.
Star Wars, there's Star Trek, there's anything under the sun now, and it's great, and it's a great environment, but Star Wars celebration is just Star Wars, and it's the best environment for that. But as Revenge of the Sith ended, I think fans were like, well, what's going to happen?
Right.
Because we love getting together and we need something new, and Clone Wars really filled that gap. There was a long period where we were the new Star Wars coming out, and I think doing episodes, the episodic nature of the series let us improve on a regular basis week to week. And I think the fans got used to like, well, maybe these 4 episodes aren't my favorite, but boy, I sure like the 3 after that.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of changing the narrative on like, I have to like all of it. It's like, well, you might like these droid stories and you might not like these clone stories, or you might like these Jedi stories. We were telling different stories and people kind of understood that because we were experimenting. I mean, one of the reasons why I think that I mean, like, at least I hope I've gotten better is I've had so many cracks at it, in Clone Wars alone, we did over 100 episodes.
Yeah.
You add Rebels to that, you're seeing more. So like, it's like anything, if you have repetition and you're doing things over and over again, you watch the results. I mean, how many times you make a film, you watch the results and you go, boy, if I knew then what I know now about the yield, well, in series, you can improve that. and you go back and do it better the next time you do a speeder bike chase or a starfighter chase or a dramatic moment between Anakin and Padme. It applies across the board.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you have your whole, toy chest of Kenner toys, and I mean, that's why I believe one of your favorite characters is Plo Koon, right?
I was like the weird ones, yeah.
But you can have entire episodes devoted to these characters, right?
Yeah, and make a character around him. Give him an experience and give him depth and give him things that there were never going to be time for when you're doing the films and Anakin's story. And in those ways, the one thing that we really learned was the newer things we were doing with Ahsoka, with Rex. Those were the things that started to feel the most like Star Wars, and they were our own. Yeah. And so we started leaning that direction, and not we always have things that connect us to the past, but it's really about how do we make something that has value now, value to kids today, that relates to them now, that honors this tradition, but also sets up a future for this saga, which keeps on going. A lot of what my job is, I feel, is to maintain a legacy, and you don't do that by just repeating and rewashing and showing things as they were. And yes, I love the original trilogy, but that was a beginning. And if the story continues, we have to tell stories that are worth telling and create new characters. And I know from working with George that he was always doing that, because he created Ahsoka, and I never grew up thinking that Anakin Skywalker had a Padawan. I always thought when I was a kid that maybe Anakin was the kid and maybe he was the one learning.
Right.
But George had this different idea that he was young and he was also given somebody to teach, and that became a responsibility, because a lot of his struggle is attachment and how do you let go of somebody. And if somebody can defend themselves and can be strong on their own, maybe you should give them their own agency and you should trust them. And so it helped the narrative around that character to have this, very proactive, self-reliant young woman next to him, and not something that any of us saw. Like when he first brought it up, I thought, well, that's different. I'm excited about it, but it's not something I ever certainly thought of. But what are you going to do? I mean, George is telling you Anakin's got a Padawan.
Yeah.
So Anakin has the Padawan, and it turns out, like usual, he's right.
I mean, Dave, I gotta say, like, I feel like I'm your friend who you convinced to watch that the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. You should rewatch it again. Like it's like there's definitely an appreciation now.
Of course. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there's I think it's any movie, right? If you watch any movie again, especially after you've had life experience, your experience in life will change your interaction with that story, and that's the power of storytelling and film and the way we can be invested in it. And I think that's rewatching movies, no matter how many times you've seen them, you never know when you're going to see some little thing or it's going to hit you in a different way. And I think that's the wonderful, thing of the test of times of our medium.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about, kind of like, the next grand experiment, the Mandalorian. So like, it's like, how were you approached and developing the show with Favreau, with Jon Favreau? So.
Yeah, well, it's just, again, it's all right place, right time, and collaborating. I knew Jon Favreau from working on Clone Wars. He was mixing Iron Man at Skywalker Ranch when I was making Clone Wars, and his son Max wanted to see some Clone Wars, and I was like, well, it's not even out yet. But knowing or hearing that Jon is such a fan of things, I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you let me see some Iron Man, I'll let you see some Clone Wars. So we made a little director to director trade, and he's just a really down to earth guy. Was super nice and personable. I like people like that right away. And he's like, if you need a voice, I'd love to do one. I needed a voice, so we threw him in there. He was always great with that. I'll never forget, Jon hit with Iron Man in such a big way, and people loved it and really opened up the whole Marvel universe and superhero films. But despite all of that and the demands on his schedule, he always made time to come record his lines, and he always gave it the time and the measure that it needed to be good. And that's something special. I think, he wants everything he's involved with to be good. And so when he approached Lucasfilm about doing a TV series for Disney Plus, and Carrie Beck was aware of, me knowing him, she and Kathleen Kennedy started thinking, well, maybe this is the opportunity Dave needs to get into live action. Because when Kathy first came into the company and she met with a lot of us, she said, well, what are your interests? Where do you see yourself? And I said, well, I never would have even dreamed it if I hadn't worked with George. But George really got me interested in live action because the way he taught me to make Clone Wars and virtual production through ZViz and Previs, staging and blocking, I think it's something that really interests me. And so she kept that in the back of her mind, and she'd send me to set to watch JJ work or to watch Ryan Johnson work or Gareth Edwards. But it's a big thing. It's a big deal. It's a massive franchise, and I think finding a place for me working with someone like John was the ideal environment, because like I said earlier, I don't like to just get on and head something up if I've never really done it or understood it. I mean, I know you got to jump into the pool at some point, but I have such respect for the craft and for everybody involved. And I don't know what all the jobs are. And I went to several sets, and it's a lot of responsibility. And more than my ego to want to make a story is the feeling of responsibility I have for those people and that crew and that team. So, John has a fantastic team of people, and they, help to make an environment where someone like me that wants to be a storyteller and wants to create characters, they could facilitate the images and the imagination I had. So it was a perfect combination because, John had a lot of great ideas. I had a lot of Star Wars knowledge. He knows live action filmmaking. I know Star Wars filmmaking. And so we really fit together well. And, he came at me with this crazy idea of having this childlike character that looks like Yoda, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know, that's tough because Yoda's like an untouchable character, and that's boy, we're gonna have to be very careful. But I also thought, you look at this saga of Star Wars now, and someone's gonna do that. It's an idea that's out there. What was Yoda like when he was young? What would a young version of that be? Are there more of him? And I thought, if someone's going to do it, I like that it's John because I trust his sensibilities, and I like that I'm going to be there to kind of, shepherd this thing as well. So it's been a great experience, and John's been a great mentor to me for live action, and he's definitely improved my eye for things, especially writing, working with actors on a stage. He's been just a incredible mentor for me in that regard.
So as friends for the festival, Taika Waititi is, we've been to the festival many times, and a personal friend of mine is Deborah Chow.
Oh yeah, I love Deb.
Yeah, so it's like because you're a director, but you're also a showrunner. How's it working with these directors as well? Especially they were on season 1, so
it's fantastic. I mean, it's Deb is so amazingly talented, and I was very fortunate in that when I was shooting my first episode, the pilot for Mandalorian, is the first live action thing I was ever doing. Deb and I were block shooting, so we were together quite a bit, sharing stages. She was on one set, I was on the other. John is doing this big series for the first time, really for him, and Star Wars, a lot of pressure, and so we really had each other to rely on and to discuss in between takes. And, Deb was great with being supportive and, just giving me advice. And she would ask me Star Wars things that she needed to know, and I would help her with that. And it was a great team environment. Taika coming on, all the wonderful work he's done, but just, he's having fun and putting the crew at ease. And for me, I'm always learning. I think every opportunity you have around such talented people, you can take so much from what everyone brings to the process and how different people approach it. Every director we had on season 1 was different and approached things in a slightly different way. Rick was different than Bryce, was different than Deb, was different than Taika, different than me. There was no one way to do it. And that was encouraging because it meant that I could find my own way and my own style, but there were certain rules and certain things. So it was like a film school, a film camp. Maybe that sounds cheesy, but it was great. I mean, I'm still great friends with all those people. I love when I see them and I look back on it. For me, one of the experiences of making any of these stories in animation or live action is the connection it gives you with people.
Right.
And, I was telling someone the other day, I always sit and watch the credits, not just out of respect, but I love to see the names of these people that I made this thing with,
Yeah.
that they're a part of it and remember what they brought to it and the experience of it. And so the end credits become this amazing document of memory, which is, just so unique and is there. And I guess for me, it's like, in hockey, if you know hockey, when you win the Stanley Cup, your name goes on it. And that's the
Right.
dream of every hockey player, is to get your name on this trophy. And, so
Mhm.
at the end of every episode, we have like our own Stanley Cup and your name goes on that episode, and you're there together forever. When anyone watches that, they're going to see all your names together. And I think that's incredibly special.
That's a great analogy. That's a great analogy. And I mean, so, I mean, I know we're running out of time, Dave. Thank you so much. But like, my last question is like, and I don't know, you don't have to answer this. Like, we're not going to go into season two. The work will speak for itself.
I hope
But
so.
like, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just incredible to see. I mean, to talk to you and how you Star Wars and everything is like kind of very much your film school in a way.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
But you are the steward of this whole incredible franchise in that sense. So, I mean, like, where do you see yourself in the future of Star Wars? And I mean, there's a lot of more series being output. They're coming out movies eventually. So
I don't know. I mean, I've definitely got some stories left to tell, and I would have thought that was crazy years ago when I started. But Star Wars has just proved to be this evergreen thing in my mind where I really enjoy telling stories in this galaxy, and I really enjoy working with the people that I do, and that those two things are so hard to find.
yeah, yeah,
That I love it, and I'm so excited about what we've created in not just season 2 of Mandalorian, but the new animated series that we're making as well. And the best thing is when the audience finally gets to watch it. So thank goodness the audience will be well into season 2 by the time they see this. I hope they'll be enjoying it, and I'm really excited for people to see my follow-up episode that I directed this year, because I think I took all the things I learned in season 1 and really applied them, and it feels to me more comfortable, and I'm happy about that, because I'm learning. I want to keep learning and growing, and live action I think has so much to offer, and I'm just at the beginning of my path there. I never thought it's something I would do. I'm still blown away that I get to walk onto a set and someone's built something that I wrote in the script physically, and I'm standing there and someone's going to portray this character that I wrote. It's mind-blowing, and it's an awesome experience. It's a tremendous responsibility, but I love it, and I love every aspect of it, from the story to the audience to the jobs that it creates. It's an incredibly fulfilling thing. So I think eventually that there are stories that I would do that God forbid aren't Star Wars down the road, but we'll see. I mean, right now I'm so enjoying this galaxy, and I feel really good about what's going on with the storytelling. And I am here to kind of keep an eye on things now that George is gone. That's part of the legacy there. There are a couple of us Jedi still poking around here, so that's our job, is to pass on what we've learned. That's the most important part of the Jedi teaching. Yoda reminds Luke to do the same. So yeah, it's you have to be a guardian of the Force here.
Absolutely. I mean, that's so Bushido of you. That's so like.
Well, yeah. Well, there you go. That's very correct.
Well, thank you so much, Dave, for
thank you.
This chat, and like incredible. This is like the greatest train set to ever play with. So congratulations for all your success, and then also for just bringing so much joy to millions of fans. So that's why we're very honored to honor you this year as one of our Maverick recipients at the Hawaii National Film Festival.
Thank you so much.
We hope to see you in person one day as well.
I would love that.
Yeah, let's make that happen. Okay.
Thank you so much, Anderson. Thank you.
Yeah. So just start really quick. So thank you again, everyone, for joining this conversation with Dave Filoni, one of our Holly Kalani Maverick Award recipients. To support the festival, we have a 40 for 40 campaign to raise $40,000 by the end of the festival, especially in these difficult times. So just for more information, just go to HIFF.org/40-4-40. That's the number 40-FOR-40. And again, for all the updates and all the our films, events, just go to our website at HIFF.org. Again, thank you again, Dave, for joining us, and also and all the audience out there for listening to us and watching us on this like very momentous occasion to peek into the brain of Dave Filoni, who is definitely the steward of the Star Wars universe. Thank you, mahalo for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. May the force be with you.